Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. We're carrying on with our review of the changes from the 31 March class update in the beta stream, and today we have an absolute banger with the Disruptor, aka ChadStorm, an absolute banger of a class, and not for the reasons that you might think. So today we'll carry that on. As a reminder to all of you, this is the first patch to the class update beta. So a quick recap of some of the other changes. We've had new Recon classes added, the Eliminator Recon Sniper and AM Recon. We've had all three of the Chronos and Riotguards experiencing changes from the initial version that was in the beta. We have the all new switchable abilities, and we're going to be going into depth for the Disruptor during this video. And finally, obviously, we have the color reskins, the really sexy color reskins, a little bit of fashion tech going on. And I, for one, absolutely love that. There were a couple of other bug fixes as well, most notably on dogs. But I wanted to keep this brief, lads, because we've already gone over this before. And just a reminder again, before we jump in, the other relevant videos you guys should watch. All of these are linked in the description. We've got the Fusion Face Wreckers if you want to understand how to get access to the beta stream and see some of the changes to the Chrono classes. Watch the Riotguard Revolution video for the changes to the Disruptor from the initial beta stream release. And I do implore you to watch that because a lot of the things I state during this overview will be off the basis of the original change class that was in the beta at the start. And finally, I also already have another video talking about the changes to the Comboguard that were in this patch. Also, some overall views on the switchable abilities. So I do ask you, do watch that if you want a bit more, I guess, of a rounded understanding as to some of the things that have changed in this patch. Right, so on to the overall thoughts I have around the Disruptor class. Now, I absolutely love this class, but you have to experience Disruptor, or as I like to call him, ChadStorm, to fully understand his greatness. ChadStorm is very, very fun to play, and I encourage all of you to try him before he's changed again, and it looks like he will be changed in the next day or two, as Shrike and the team look to release another patch that's going to impact and balance and tweak with all of the classes in the current beta. So let's talk through a few of the issues that exist with the Disruptor. So I'm going to boil this down to 2 points. So he's a class with a power level problem and an identity problem. So what does that mean? Number one, he's overpowered, which allows him to play far more aggressively and offensively than his defined role as a corner controller. Remember, lads, he's meant to be played defensively, which would be in line with the overall Riotguard persona, but because of his overall power level, that really just means you can play him incredibly offensively. So onto the issues with identity. These are twofold. So number one, the power level impacts his identity, as I firmly believe that he is best played offensively and aggressively and not in line with his kind of defined role, and you'll see that here as kind of crowd control, area control, defensive, setting up choke points, that kind of stuff. But the other issue with him is not on identity, is that he simply isn't a Riotguard class, at least not in his current iteration. And that's because his Riot Shield overall is pretty much an afterthought, and it's only being used through a very underwhelming Bulwark ability. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But overall, issues with power, issues with identity, both need to be fixed, and I'm sure FFG will find a way to do that. Let's quickly run over some of this class's significant strengths. So, it is a highly mobile class without a mobility ability, right? This is because of his very high inherent movement speed. You don't see that anywhere in the menu selection screen. You can only see it when you jump in your run, but this is the fastest Riotguard class. This was overall a bit of an experiment done by FFG, and I think the results of the experiment are as follows. If your character has high movement speed, there is absolutely no reason to have a mobility ability. high movement speed is in itself a baked-in mobility ability, and I think this experiment proves that. This class doesn't have a mobility ability, but in the end, it is still very mobile. So, other things on this, effectively the fact that they don't have a mobility gives them a free ability, which makes this class highly versatile. And whilst the intention is that it should be played defensively, like we said, camping corners, holding an area, the most fun, and I would argue the most optimal way to play him right now, is pure offensive aggression. And I'll show you guys how that works out as I showcase some gameplay later on towards the end of the video. Another thing to note with the Riotguard Disruptor, or ChadStorm, is that he is one of the most survivable classes. Now you might think, wait, he doesn't have Methadone. He doesn't really have any inherent way to gain health. So why is he survivable? Well, it's because of three really important facts. Number one, he has access to the shock trophy system. In my prior video, I managed to show you guys how any sort of constructs, any sort of summons that you manage to put down, the main benefit they give you is that they draw enemy aggro away from you. And that's no different for the shock trophy system. The fact that you can put this on the ground and enemies will de-aggro from you is a big key to his current survivability. The other points are he's got very high movement speed. We talked about this already. This effectively gives him a chance to dodge bullets and kite really effectively. Also, it's worth noting that he is the only Riotguard subclass that has access to blue fusion shields. So if you guys think of Guard Judge, it removes shields. If you think of the Riotguard class with the Stimulus perk now, you have no energy or fusion shields. Well, the Riotguard Disruptor is a bit of a deviation from this in that he does have a significant chunk of 1,200 fusion shields, and that's another part of his survivability. So, in substance, lads, ChadStorm is not a Riotguard. He is the Greek god Zeus, applying shock effects, stun effects. He is the only Riotguard class that doesn't need his shield at all, lads. The shield is merely a suggestion. The shield, in this case, actually wears him for protection. And it's the only Riotguard class that doesn't depend on his shield in some way, shape, or form. He shocks and stuns his enemies with lightning attacks, and his gloriously chiseled jawline, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. The list pretty much goes on. He simply has far too much going on for him, and he needs to be toned down a bit. That's the overall snapshot of the Disruptor. Let's start moving on to specific abilities. And if you give me a second here, lads, I'm going to quickly put up this overlay here. This is the first big change. So if we look over onto his first ability, Defensive Strike. Now in the top right corner, what you'll see is the prior ability. Now this is where you'll note an activatable melee strike has replaced the traditional mobility ability, which was Quick Draw Dash. This is only possible because the movement speed is so high. We've talked about this already. Fast classes don't need mobility abilities because you can reposition quickly and dance around enemy bullets. The activatable melee abilities feel so much better than the triggered ones, like in, for example, the Assault Grenadiers Commando. And it is the single reason why this class can be played so aggressively. Don't let the use of the word defensive here color how you see this ability. It is purely offensive, it is aggressive, and it's on a low 6-second cooldown with some amazing utility attached, lads. I mean, there's a stun for 1 second, and then on top of that, after 2 seconds of not getting hit, you increase the punch damage and movement speed by 15%. It is so stacked as a activatable ability, and that's one of the main reasons why this class is so overpowered. It's simply doing too much. Now, if Shrike and team are dead set on this class being a defensive corner camping class, this should really be the first ability that goes. Too much versatility, too much stuff on one ability. Has to be changed up if you want him to go back to a defensive corner camping, corner hugging class. Now, one thing that we need to note, if this does change, you will lose the ability to do a 1-2 punch with Defensive Strike and Shock Trophy. That's really important to this class because the shock effect, and I can see if I can't find the... There we go. If you read the purple wording down there, shock prevents shields from recharging. If another shock effect is applied, the target is stunned. So it's really critical for this class to maintain an ability to do a 1-2 punch in terms of shock effects, because that applies the stun, right? That's really core and critical to this class. So whereas I say I think defensive strike needs to go, there still needs to be a shock applicator that comes on the back of that. So as I've said, combination of high movement speed and no mobility ability should make its comeback on the Assault Grenadier class, but I don't think this is something that's core to the Disruptor, at least not in terms of how he's meant to be played. Okay? Now, we've talked about this becoming a, if you just give me a second, lads, we've talked about Defensive Strike becoming an activatable ability. It used to be baked into the Lightning Strike ability. So I'm going to just mouse over down to Overload, because that's the new perk that has replaced Lightning Strike. But you can see how they've separated out the two portions of Lightning Strike. One now goes into Defensive Strike, and that's now activatable, whereas before it was once again something that you trigger upon being close to enemies. And the other part of it is hitting your own shock sentry. So they've separated those two out. The activatable's on the punch, and now the overload is what hits your own shock sentry turret, right? And this is pretty cool. This ability is really great. You hit your shock sentry turret. It gives you a bit of a discharge effect off the turret. It does shock damage in an area. And if you are applying shock for a second time, it stuns your enemies, which is really core to the identity of this class. So, just moving on, I think this is a positive change overall. It does deepen the synergy with the trophy system. I mean, it was there already, but the problem with having a perk-based strike ability, one that triggers versus one that's activatable, is that what would happen at times in the past is that there would be an automatic melee strike that could accidentally be used on the trophy instead of an enemy, or on an enemy instead of a trophy. So the use case scenario here is you put down a shock trophy system, an enemy comes close to it, you want to strike the turret, but because you get too close to the enemy, you end up striking the enemy. Same in the other way around, an enemy comes close, you have the shock turret close, you want to finish him off quickly with a punch, you punch the turret, you don't punch the enemy. It's a lot better when it's separate, and I like it for that fact, but like I said, it does really push the class into a much more offensive play style. Although, in this case, far less randomness and far easier to activate your shock trophy system. So, positive change overall. Now, moving on to the mastery. Really important to note here, lads. This class didn't have a mastery ability before. And I mean, by before, I mean in the previous iteration of the beta. So, now, basically, he's stolen this from the Riotguard. So the current mastery that he has, which is an increase in any damage to stun enemies by 35%, this used to be what the Riotguard had. Riotguard's mastery has obviously changed. Completely and totally ripped out of Riotguard and into Disruptor. And if you're looking at this holistically, it actually does make a lot of sense, right? Because you want the class to be built around the double application of shocked status effect. This ends up stunning an enemy. When you do stun an enemy, the mastery kicks in, opening up that enemy for further damage from basically any sources. Just through the fact that you have that additional damage on stunned. This mastery on this class is really, really strong. And I think it's core to his identity and makes a heck of a lot of sense, even though in my prior video, I was talking and lamenting the fact that it's been taken away from the Comboguard. Right, moving on. And if we can just pop back to another overlay. Shock trophy system hasn't changed all that much. Still one of the best abilities in the game. Absolutely love the shock trophy system. You place a turret on the ground. It does shock damage in a radius. It applies shocked. On top of that, you can hit the turret every 5 seconds and therefore get it to discharge another shock effect. Really, really cool. Great core identity for the class, and a lot of fun to play around. Even though, like I said, I would argue you can play this far more offensively than the class description would lead you to believe. What else can I say about the Shock Trophy system? We already said that it draws aggro, it holds corners, and also one thing to note, it is currently bugged. The hitbox for Shock Trophy system is quite difficult to hit for enemies, and in the end it ends up being such a massive tank. It just soaks enemy damage. And obviously that needs to change. It will make you think more about turret placement. But right now, I think it's probably a bit too strong because of the fact that it soaks so much damage. The other thing that I'd like to see change for the Shock Trophy system is that it really needs to be more reliably deployable in the right spot. And by what I mean by that is oftentimes you try deploy it on the ground and it just moves to an odd location. And for an item or an ability that's so dependent on proper placement, you want to place this behind boxes, you want to place this in corners so enemies can't get at it, to shoot it without being exposed to the shock. For something that needs to be placed with such precision, it is highly unreliable how it's implemented. My honest opinion here would be that you make a very short radius throwable so that you can place it in the right position. I've even had examples where the Shock Trophy system was placed on top of boxes, and that ultimately just broke the enemy AI because they can't shoot it and they just stand still staring at it. But overall, no changes, still really strong, really, really fun and core to the identity of the class. Right, moving on. Focus perks. So the first focus perk, which is Multidimensional Traps. Let me just mouse over that. Really, really strong and great for the defensive role that this class is meant to play. So your traps and constructs, you obviously have the Shock Trophy system. Now, when we look at the switchable abilities, you're going to see that he's got access to far more traps and constructs than he did before. It really is awesome because this focus perk gives you a 30% chance to do a double cast, and it can trigger upon the recast. I've got a little bit of a clip later on, which you'll see with one of the switchable abilities where it triggered 3 or 4 times in a row. It was absolutely bonkers. But Multidimensional Traps is a brilliant focus perk, absolutely in line with the play. It hasn't changed from before, but and I don't think it should. I think it's a rare example right now of a focus perk that actually does fundamentally change the way you play. It really does feed into the way you want to play as the ChadStorm class. Moving on to the other one, and this is almost the exact opposite. And again, another example of a bit of a poorly thought out focus perk. So perfect timing, what is it? After not firing for 2 seconds, it increases your damage by 30%. It increases your critical chance by 30%, and it lasts 3 seconds. Now, this focus perk is by far the better one. And you might think, well, that's really weird, Flash. Why would you say that? Because like I said before, lads, I think this class is much better played with a high tempo, high offensive strategy, running into enemies, dropping shock turrets, and just basically shooting them and mowing them down, right? You got that activatable defensive strike. Everything seems to lead into an offensive play, and this focus perk is a core reason behind it. It's a very uninspiring design for a focus perk, but it does so much in terms of damage and crit chance, and it's one of the core reasons why this class has an identity problem at the moment, because I would much rather pick perfect timing and go all-out offense than what actually makes a heck of a lot more sense, which is multi-dimensional traps, right? So for the purpose of our showcase, and when we do jump into a game, I will be playing with perfect timing just to illustrate this point. It is worth noting with focus perks overall, they are in a really weird spot now. I don't really understand what the focus of focus perks are or what they're meant to achieve. They are going to need an overall pass at some point to really cement them into the role of opening up different ways to play your classes, right? That's just a different note. I wanted to put that in there because I don't think the focus perks have a heck of a lot of focus at the moment, if that makes any sense. Right, moving on, lads, to the last two perks, and both of them, unfortunately, a little bit underwhelming. Both of them haven't been changed. Let's start with Bulwark. So Bulwark was already a really underwhelming ability even before the changes in this beta patch. It's completely useless now. Why? Well, what's one of the things that we've removed? We've removed the dash ability. We've removed the mobility ability, right? So now the class can't dash. So even when Bulwark does go up, you can't even dash into enemies. There's no offensive capability built into the Bulwark. It just basically exists at the moment. It's on a high cooldown, it activates when your shields are down, and beyond that, absolutely no utility. Doesn't play into the class, doesn't play into the trap theme, doesn't play into the shock theme, and just doesn't make any sort of sense, right? The second reason why Bulwark doesn't make sense is because you're a fast character, right? So your primary method for avoiding damage is movement. I just simply don't see a reason why you need Bulwark, right? You take damage, if you dodge, you sidestep, you dance, you can avoid it. Bulwark literally adds nothing, because that's what I'll continue to do even when Bulwark is up. I do think it offers about 60 or 80 armor when it does go up, but completely useless perk. Don't think it's required. I think they need to redesign it and find a way to use this shield more effectively in the ChadStorm class. Okay, moving on. Crowd Controller. Again, it's unchanged. Like I said in my previous video, lads, it makes sense as a perk. It's just very boring. So, stronger negative status effects, longer duration negative status effects, and traps can critically activate with 2 times power. All of that makes sense. Obviously, the negative status effects being your shock and your stun effects when you double apply the shock. Your traps, obviously, it plays into that. A little bit boring, but you know what? At least it makes sense. No changes here from the prior iteration, but I just thought it was worth running over again. Okay, right, so that moves us on to the last and perhaps the most interesting part of the overall patch changes, and that is the introduction of the switchable abilities. Now, I had a very long rant about the switchable abilities in the last video. It's worth watching so you guys can understand why, but I won't go over those points again at this point. Suffice it to say that Disruptor's switchables are far more class specific than the others and feed into his shock and trap playstyle. I think they probably, of all of the Riotguard classes, his switchables make the most sense in terms of enabling what he's trying to do in the first place. So let's start with Shock MASTERKEY, and I'm just going to quickly pop up the prior version of Shock MASTERKEY. I have got a collection of gameplays for each of these items which we'll go through, but the first thing to note, Shock MASTERKEY has changed. So its cooldown initially was 16 seconds, and it had slightly lesser damage. It's now been moved back up to, sorry, no, just put Shock MASTERKEY up. It's now been moved back up to 25 seconds. I'm not sure if the damage has been increased too, but it's really good as an offensive option, and it can obviously trigger the stunned synergy with the double application of shocked. It has a new visual effect, which it didn't have in the prior version. It basically is a cone. It looks like a cone-based lightning attack, and you'll see that in the gameplay because I will definitely showcase that. Actually, I might just jump into that right now so you lads can have a look at that. So what else do I think about the Shock MASTERKEY? It's very strong, a core part of the offensive Disruptor build. Definitely A tier. It's not quite S tier due to the fact that it does have that longer cooldown. But as I said earlier, lads, I do think this class is best placed offensively in its current iteration. And because of that, I do think that Shock MASTERKEY is the best ability at the moment. There are much better abilities that feed into his trap stun playstyle. But right now, offensive capability, nothing beats Shock MASTERKEY. Right. Moving on to TEARGAS, lads. Oh. Good old tear gas. So this is one of the common abilities which Comboguard shares with both the Guard Judge and with the Riotguard base class. Again, it's just fine. Deals damage over time to enemies in the cloud. It's shot out directionally, which I like. It's not lobbed like a typical grenade. It does do impact damage. But again, lads, completely bland. Doesn't quite synergize with the shock effects in the kit. And guess what? You can't fix that. Because it's a common, both to Guard Judge and the base Riotguard class, developers have mentioned that switchable abilities will be reduced to 4. This, to me, is the candidate for removal, because tear gas just doesn't play in any way, shape, or form to the Riotguard strengths, doesn't synergize with anything, and because it's common across the other classes, there's just no real way to change it, right? I mean, imagine you make a shock effect to this. I mean, first of all, it wouldn't make sense thematically. But second, then that shock effect would exist for both the Riotguard and the Guard Judge. And obviously, what value is that to those two classes? That's the problem with these common abilities. So, can't wait to see it go. Would love to see the back of it. Hopefully it is the one that gets cut. Moving on to the next one, Lightning Cluster. Now, Lightning Cluster, lads, is absolutely S tier. It is ridiculous as a switchable ability. It's very, very strong. Basically what it is, you throw out grenade style, which is a bit odd, but you throw out a set of cluster lightning traps, a cluster of lightning traps. These deal very high damage when walked over. It doesn't impact you, but it does impact your enemies. It is perfect for setting up a death room for your enemies, really playing into what the class tries to do, right? So the idea is you drop your shock trophy down. You can see this video right here. This is a death room, lads. Look at that. Nothing is coming in there without getting utterly destroyed. And you'll see I'm going to go down here and aggro a bunch of enemies from the bottom over here. And they are absolutely going to get melted through the combination of the traps and the shock current that's there. Look at this now. Like, just melted. Melted. Brilliant. So, love Lightning Cluster. S tier in my mind. What it could probably use is a little bit of a duration. So right now it's unlimited duration. The traps just stay forever. It could use maybe like a length, maybe like 40 or 60 second duration, so that you're forced to use it in the right moments. Also think it's a bit odd that it's a throwable. Not sure why. It seems like the perfect candidate to be deployed, i.e. just where you're standing. And you'll see in one of the examples here, and you will have to look back on it, I do end up dropping this on the ground right in front of me. And I think it, because of the impact of the Multidimensional Traps Focus Perk, it ends up triggering 3 or 4 times, which is just ridiculous. Anyway, really awesome. Lightning Cluster, absolutely love it. Plays into the classes, what the class tries to do, and is a heck of a lot of fun building those death rooms for your enemies. Right, moving on to Thunder Coils now. This ability is broken, lads. It doesn't work. As you can see, what I'm doing down there is playing with it for the very first time. All it does is just stun you. It stuns you and the enemies around you, and you'll see that right over here. I walk into these enemies, I stun them. Now the question is, do I stun them with the Thunder Coils, or is it just ChadStorm stunning them with his incredibly chiseled jawline? But the idea is, it's meant to put poles on the ground. Enemies are meant to run over it. They get stunned immediately, and this is going to be an absolute banger of an ability once it's working. It's so strong, and you can see here there is a bit of a meta in the way you can play it right now that still works. The idea is you drop your lightning, you drop your, obviously, your shock trophy system, and you stun everyone around you, and therefore they're taking damage. Obviously, it's not meant to stun you, but it was a funny way I found to play it, right? You can see over here, all the enemies are stunned. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to run into them at the bottom and end up stunning them, and that it just ends up killing them because they're next to the shock trophy system. They're just going to have to be careful with how they fix this one, right? The one thing we need to note here is that for Thunder Coils, you got to remember that the mastery ability for this class is increased damage on stunned enemies, the 35% increased damage on stunned enemies. The stun duration on Thunder Coils right now is so long, you can get incredible value out of the combination of the Thunder Coils and your mastery ability. So it just needs to be careful in how they eventually implement it. Otherwise, this is just going to be bonkers tier powerful. But again, thematic, it's a trap, it's shocked, it's stunned, makes sense. I think it'll be S tier. Let's move on to the final switchable, which is the CRYO Cannon. Now, what is the CRYO Cannon? It places an automatic cryo cannon on the ground, fires freezing chemicals, vulnerable with a low fire rate, and applies frost. Okay, so that's interesting that it's a freeze effect. Sure, it does play into like the kind of trap play that this class is going for, but it doesn't play in any sort of way with shocked or stunned. It doesn't synergize with your mastery. It's a little bit weird to have it, but I guess it works thematically with the class, although it doesn't deeply synergize in many different ways. The other issues I had with the CRYO Cannon is that sometimes it's quite tricky to place, much like the shock trophy system. It's difficult to quite get it in the positions that you want to, and I really did struggle to make it effective whilst playing with it. And part of the reason for this is because of that short range, right? You'll see with a couple of these clips that I've got over here, it's just really hard to get that turret to shoot because of the really, really low range. There's also a bit of a weird freeze effect. You can see that right now on the screen. It does have a little strange freeze effect. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but I don't know if it kind of floats above the ground. You can see that frozen ground, but it kind of floats above the ground. It's a bit weird. Have to look into that. But overall, not a great ability, but with some tweaks, it's going to be really, really powerful. It's okay. Not A tier, not S tier. Not that fun to play, to be honest, but it's okay. And I'm sure it'll be improved as the beta goes on. The last thing I want to say about it is that the target acquisition time is quite slow, but the fire rate is quite good once it starts shooting. So it takes a while to start shooting, but once it does start shooting, it kills enemies fairly quickly. All right, so lads, that's a good 30 minutes in. I think what we're going to end up doing is quickly showcasing to you just how bonkers this class is offensively. So we're going to just jump into a game really quickly. I'm going to take the perfect timing. I'm going to take the shock master key, and I'm just going to illustrate why I think this class is best played with all out, balls to the wall offense. So as we jump into this game, right, we're in. And I'm just going to run at enemies, lads. You'll see what I mean here. I'm just going to run at enemies. I'm going to absolutely obliterate them. Here's a whole bunch of enemies here. Let's just get rid of these guys here. Punch that guy there. That's a whole group of enemies just gone, right? Let's do this again here. Punch there. This class is just bonkers. Absolutely no reason to play corner hugging. Now, I know these enemies are quite low level at the moment, and it is going to end up being much more difficult further down the line. You might need to play a bit more defensively, but right now, lads, just with the combination of things you have available between this and just shooting them down, obviously your perfect timing perk is just absolutely bonkers as well. Really, really strong. You're dealing so much damage to enemies here. Let's put this down over here. Let's hit it again. There we go. Guys, by the way, one thing I do want to note, there's missile turrets around here, lads. I'm really going to say to FFG again, it is quite annoying with missile turrets that the missiles they shoot are black. You can't really make them out from the back of oftentimes you can't make them out from the background. It really needs to have some sort of a clearer indicator. Although I think over there it wasn't even the missile turrets. It might have just been the pineapples that actually ended up hitting me there. Anyway, you can see over there again. I can just play all-out offensive. You can see some of these guys are running right past me, and that's because they're running towards the other shock current that I have placed somewhere down there. And that's what I mean by it attracting aggro, and that being one of the strongest aspects of this class. So again, balls to the wall, lad. More enemies here. Let's hit them with that. Let's put this down, strike them, and absolutely destroy them. I'm not taking much damage here. I'm doing damage all around. And that's what I mean, lads. This class is best played offensively at the moment. And it's so much fun. So much versatility with the punch. I'm not even using it as often as I should be over here, lads. And I'm just making immense inroads. Do that. Punch them. Don't like the way they run away. Look at that. Again, absolutely destroyed, lads. I took the foil pistol just to, again, prove this point. It doesn't really even matter here, lads. Whatever we pick. Play him a bit more defensively over here. You can see over there, I didn't quite place the turret where I wanted it. But it doesn't matter. Because I don't really need that turret, lads. I'm such a beast. Look at this. Look at this. So much offensive capability, lads. It's just bonkers. It really is bonkers. That's a bit of a stupid item to have picked up. Can I actually get rid of that, by the way? The first time I think I picked up Core of Daring. Okay. And that's odd, by the way. That was a normal item box. Oh, wait, that's a double item box. I think that's another bug. Fusion mines. Another thing that's going to work great with multi-dimensional traps, lads. Anyway, there it goes out. Absolutely killed everyone over there. Bonkers. Powerful, boys. Put this over here. Again, I try to place it there, but it places it out at a very strange distance. And again, lads, just no fear at the moment. This class is far too powerful for its own good. And like I said, right now, look at that. Aggro attracted. They don't even care about me, boys. And I can just take them out like that. Alright, so that's the class, lads. Lots of fun. I do say, give him a test run if you haven't done so already. Lots of fun to play. Now I'm going to move on to just a couple of quick recommendations before we wrap up this video. On what I think needs to happen with the ChadStorm, a.k.a. Riotguard Disruptor class, in order just to bring him more in line with the other Riotguards. So there needs to definitely be some sort of a nerf to the power level and a readjustment back towards more of a typical Riotguard style play, more defensive, something that's going to foster him playing around corners, playing around his shock current. And this can be achieved through kind of a combination of changes, right? So I'm going to list a couple of things here. The sweet spot is probably somewhere in between. So first off, they need to find a use of the shield that is not the Bulwark ability. Bulwark is just incredibly boring in its current iteration. They need to find a use for the shield. It needs to interact with the traps, needs to interact with shocked in some sort of way. Bulwark right now is boring and needs to change. The other thing they need to do is removal of the defensive strike and replacing it either with some sort of a different shock effect applier or a mobility, so bring back the mobility, a mobility that plays into his corner camping style, either through some sort of a shock effect or maybe some sort of trap deployment when he dashes or a slow to enemies, but just basically something that feeds into that shock playstyle. I mean, lightning boots is an item already. That might be an idea of something you might want to apply, although maybe an area of effect behind him remains shocked so that when enemies run through it, that's the first application of the shocked effect. The other thing that I'd like to say is that overload should remain. This is that ability to strike your own turret. It really is good. This should be extended to this, but what I think is that when the activatable part of this is removed, I think that the overload shouldn't extend to being able to hit your enemies. Otherwise, you'll end up with the same problems as you had before, where you want to hit the enemy, but you hit the shock trophy, or vice versa, right? I don't think you need an offensive strike ability for a defensive class like this. And as I said, again, it's one of the main reasons why this class can be played so offensively together with the perfect timing focus. And then moving on to the perfect timing focus, as I said, drives the aggressive style, game style, or play style, should go away, should be another focus perk there that plays in again to the trap style, plays in again to the shock and stun effects, but not something as boring as perfect timing or as powerful, because that's one of the core problems of the class and why he is best played offensively. Finally, all of this has to be done with a very low cooldown ability. So whatever this becomes has to be low cooldown, because the strike right now is 6-second cooldown, and it's the first applicator for your shock. This class needs quick and easy ways to double apply the shock effect. So you can rely on the stun, so you can play into your mastery. Whatever it gets replaced by has to enable that playstyle. And pretty much the final point is, whatever they choose to do with the Disruptor, the whole concept of an activatable strike ability, the speed, the kind of the shock master key, the fact that you can play so aggressively, this pretty much should be ported into an assault grenadier type class, because this is exactly where this playstyle would actually make a lot of sense, and even perfect timing, right? Assault Gren wants to be aggressive, wants to be in the face of enemies. It almost feels like this class is set up to be an Assault Gren in its current format. Let's take those things away, let's keep the concept, put it in another class, but then make Disruptor play like he's meant to play, which is around that corner camping style. Alright lads, that's been a good 40 minutes discussing the Riotguard Disruptor. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. There should be a new patch dropping in the next couple of days, so I'll make some decisions content-wise as to what we do before then. I hope you've enjoyed this overview video of the Disruptor, aka the ChadStorm subclass. If you really enjoy my content, lads, please leave me a like, drop me a subscribe. If you don't like it, leave me a dislike. Let me know what I can do better. I've been Flash Hazardous, and I will see you guys shortly. But until then, Flash out.